Expanded version. Eloise had married Laurent Beaumont on a crisp, wind-stirred autumn afternoon, the kind where the air carried a quiet hush and the fog rolled in like a secret. Her ivory gown seemed to dissolve into the mist that curled around the vineyards, as if nature itself wished to obscure what was being solemnized. Laurent stood beside her with the quiet pride of a man who had never chased love, only legacy. In St. Clement's he was revered, a vintner with weathered hands that smelled of oak barrels and crushed grapes, a man whose silence spoke louder than words. His family's roots ran deep through the soil, as did their vines, each vintage another layer in the town's history. Their marriage was not a tale of stolen glances or fluttering hearts. It was forged in necessity. Laurent's gold had swept away the shadow of Eloise's father's debts, and in return, he had acquired a wife whose beauty promised heirs and respectability. Eloise had agreed without protest. Stability, after all, was its own kind of sanctuary. But it was never passion that warmed their union, only duty. The years that followed moved in quiet, predictable cycles. Laurent lost himself in the pulse of the vineyards, marking seasons not by birthdays or anniversaries, but by the ripening of grapes and the aging of casks. Eloise, meanwhile, played her role in the Great Stone Manor, hosting dinners, managing servants, tending to roses that bloomed and died without fanfare. Her laughter, once light as lace, had become rare, fading like the sun-bleached frescoes on the chapel's ancient walls. At night, they retreated to separate bedchambers on opposite ends of the manor. No footsteps crossed between. Mornings passed with quiet nods and empty chairs. Their life was not unhappy, just hollow, a shared script without any dialogue. Next lines bed shuk the hain, mainun hain bi sitara expand kardunga, with tone intact. Beautiful lines again. Here's the expanded version that retains your lyrical tone and emotional nuance, while deepening the atmosphere and subtle tension. Julien Moreau arrived with the spring rains, his return as unanticipated and unsettling as a storm rolling in from the coast. He appeared without announcement, trailing behind him the scent of linseed oil and a decade of silence. Once a boy of St. Clement's, now a man marked by the city, his canvases bore the moods of Paris. Deep indigos that whispered of sleepless nights, and stormy grays that spoke of longing and disillusionment. He took up residence in a weather-worn barn just beyond the vineyards, its beams sagging under the weight of years. What had once housed hay and forgotten tools now became a haven for whispers. The townsfolk speculated freely about the wildness in his brushstroke, the ghosts in his eyes, and the woman whose memory clung to his name like perfume. His mother, a dancer of uncertain repute, who had disappeared one violet dusk near the river Sorgue and was never spoken of again in polite company. Eloise saw him for the first time at the Saturday market, beneath the striped awnings where rosemary mingled with ripe tomatoes. He stood at a stall examining lemons, his fingers darkened with charcoal, the residue of his restlessness. His gaze, lifted in a quiet moment, fell upon her, not with surprise, but with a slow, burning recognition. It wasn't her beauty that caught him. It was something subtler, older. The tilt of her neck as she inspected lace, the way she touched a peach, gently, like a memory. For a heartbeat, time unraveled. They had once been children, inseparable in summers past, climbing the rusted ladder of the clock tower to eat figs still warm from the sun, trading secrets as freely as candy. But the years had redrawn them, sharpened their outlines. Now, the boy was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes asked a question Eloise had buried in her silence. "Do you still remember?" She did, but she wasn't ready to remember aloud. Ready for the next part when you are. Send the Here's the expanded version that preserves your tone and themes while deepening the scene's atmosphere, symbolism, and internal emotional layers. On the eve of the grape harvest, when the air turned sweet and heavy with promise, Laurent returned to the manor earlier than expected. The skies were thick with the bruised hues of an impending storm, and a hush had settled over the vineyards like a held breath. Mud clung to his boots in thick, cracking layers, a silent testament to his labor. In one hand, he carried a bottle of 89 Bordeaux, a vintage chosen not for celebration, but perhaps as an offering, a bridge between two people long estranged. He climbed the stone staircase slowly, each step muffled by weariness and uncertainty. In his mind, he rehearsed small phrases, half-hearted, ill-fitting things he hadn't said in years. Eloise was no longer a mystery to solve. She was a presence he had neglected so thoroughly. She now moved through the house like a ghost in someone else's story. He found her in the study, back straight at the escritoire beneath the tall windows, her silhouette cast in the fading light. Her pen hovered above parchment, words blooming in black ink. She didn't hear him at first. Shh! To the one who sees. The rest of the sentence hung unfinished. The bottle slipped from Laurent's fingers, crashing against the hardwood floor. It shattered with startling violence, red wine bleeding across the carpet like spilled blood. Eloise spun around, her hand jerking mid-stroke. Ink spattered across the letter in a chaos of blots, like a Rorschach test, abstract and raw, a mirror of everything unsaid between them. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Laurent didn't speak either. His silence was no longer indifferent. It had the weight of something volcanic, trembling beneath the surface. His eyes, dark and searching, moved from the page to her face and back again. Confusion flickered there, but not surprise, as though some part of him had always known he was no longer the only one watching her. He turned and left without a word, descending the stairs like a man returning to the underworld. The door to the wine cellar groaned open and closed behind him, and he disappeared into its cool, musty shadows. For days after, the manor became a place of echoes. Glass clinked in the cellar below, softly at first, then louder. The air grew thick with fermenting silence. Laurent no longer came to dinner. Eloise no longer knocked. The house, once merely quiet, had become haunted, not by ghosts, but by isolation made visible. This section feels like the calm before an emotional storm, ready for the next part when you are. This passage is pivotal, intense, cinematic, and steeped in tragic inevitability. Here is the expanded version, enhancing the emotional stakes, imagery, and internal conflict while preserving your elegant, melancholic tone. Julien begged her to go. There's more beyond these hills, he whispered, voice ragged with urgency, as if he could will the world to change by speaking it aloud. His hands, stained with paint and calloused from years of making beauty out of emptiness, cradled her face. The gesture was tender, desperate, like a man trying to memorize a portrait before it's taken from him. Eloise closed her eyes. She could feel the warmth of his breath, the thrum of a future he promised but could not guarantee. Yet her limbs would not move. The idea of leaving, of shedding her name, her place, the carefully constructed shell of duty she had worn for so long, felt like stepping into an abyss. What lay beyond the hills might be freedom, or it might be nothing at all. She was no longer the girl who climbed clock towers for figs. She was Eloise Beaumont, lady of the manor, the silent hostess at Laurent's side. Behind her were stone walls that knew her shape, rooms she had memorized in loneliness, a garden she had kept alive with routine, if not love. Could she really vanish from all of it and still be whole? In the end, the choice was never hers to make. It was a moonless night, thick with humidity and the scent of crushed grape skins. The air pulsed with the hush before harvest. Laurent had been missing for hours. Eloise sensed something amiss, a tremor in the walls, a silence too sharp. She followed instinct, not reason, her slippers sinking into the damp soil as she hurried past the vineyard, down toward the Sorgue, where the river moved like a black ribbon through the valley. She arrived just in time. Two silhouettes stood near the bank, faint in the dark. Laurent's voice was low, edged with menace, a sound she had never heard from him before. Julien's answers were clipped, defensive. Their words, though fierce, were devoured by the current, as if the river itself refused to bear witness. And then something slipped, perhaps a shove, perhaps a misstep. Julien reeled backward, as his foot catching in the mud. His skull struck a moss. This is a haunting, lyrical ending, elegantly tragic, steeped in atmosphere and symbolism. Here's the expanded version, staying true to your voice while drawing out the emotional resolution and closing motifs with poetic weight. Expanded version. Laurent claimed it was an accident. He spoke the words with the same detachment he used to describe rot in the vines, or a flawed fermentation. The bruised gendarmes, their breath sweet with pastis and indifference, nodded solemnly and scribbled in their notebooks with hands too tired to question men like Laurent Beaumont. The matter was folded neatly, like a napkin after dinner, and quietly put away. Eloise wore gray. Not black, not white, just the muted in-between of ambiguity. Her mourning was a performance choreographed by duty, veils pinned, hands folded, lips silent. In public she was composed, her grief a ritual. But in private she drifted like smoke through the manor halls, untethered from the world she once upheld. It was in the attic that she found the painting, the final one. Tucked behind a stack of aging canvases, forgotten or perhaps hidden. Julienne had captured her as no one else had ever dared. Not as a wife or socialite, but as a woman unraveling and awakening all at once. Her eyes on the canvas glowed with a vibrancy she no longer saw in the mirror. And there, trailing from one eye, a single tear rendered in cobalt. Brilliant, defiant, eternal. It was the color that undid her. Later that week, under a sky smeared with the bruises of another storm, Eloise returned to the clock tower, the place of figs and childhood dreams, of stolen laughter and early freedom. She climbed the rusted ladder one last time, her hands pale against the iron rungs, the chill biting through her gloves. At the top, the world stretched silent beneath her. The clock's hands were still frozen, trapped at a forgotten hour. They pointed nowhere, but mocked her nonetheless. Time had long ago stopped being kind. Below, Laurent stood near the chapel path, half shrouded in fog, his face expressionless. A mask carved from stone. He didn't call out. He didn't move. Eloise closed her eyes, felt the wind press against her skin, and whispered Julien's name. But the wind stole it before it could reach anything living. Winter came with violence. One night, as thunder rolled through the valley and lightning etched its fury across the sky, a jagged bolt struck the clock tower. The stone cracked. The tower's face split down the middle like a wound reopened. And then, as if startled from a long slumber, the clock began to move. Its great iron hands jerked into motion. The bells, untouched for decades, rang out into the storm, wild, resounding, and mournful. By morning, the snow had fallen. The fields were cloaked in white. Eloise was gone. Her footprints led to the river's edge, then vanished. No body was found. No note, only the echo of chimes, a cobalt tear, and a name whispered to the wind. Would you like help titling the full story now that it's complete?